Did you know that Dr. Hind Hanafy was the first president of a government university in Egypt who was a woman? She was appointed president of Alexandria University in 2009. Welcome to the Scholarly Sisterhood podcast, a podcast that is building a stronger and more inclusive scholarly community for women around the world. This podcast is a platform for female scholars to share their story, and my hope is that from these stories, we can create a more supportive community for women navigating the academic world. I'm your host, Anna Blankenship, and I'm glad you're here. Today, we're going to learn the story of Dr. Nadia DeGama, who is a senior lecturer and the program leader for undergraduate business management programs at AFG College with the University of Aberdeen in Qatar. So without further ado, let's go meet today's scholarly sister. Well, I am just so excited to have you, Nadia, with me today just to talk more about your journey and, in academia. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So can you just start off telling us who you are and where have you found a place for yourself in education?
Sure. So I will start off, I guess, as people always do, with their job title. That's funny how we identify as that. But I am a senior lecturer currently at AFG College with the University of Aberdeen. We are a campus based in Qatar. So in addition to my role as a senior lecturer, I'm also the current undergraduate program leader for the business management program and joint programs here in the Qatar campus. In terms of academia, I actually think that I wasn't somebody that thought I wanted to have a career in academia initially. I went through the motions of my undergraduate degree, completed a master's in HRM, and I started working in HR, which was my first profession. And while working in HR, I kind of felt that what I was studying didn't really reflect the work that I was doing. So a few years into that profession, I actually applied for a PhD program with the intention, actually, that was a bit more intentional, with the intention of having a career in academia. So that did require me to resign from my job. I was an HR manager at the time, resigned for the job and really dedicate my life, which I think is interesting, the word dedicate, but really that's what we were being asked to do, is dedicate my life into a PhD program. And that's when I started my career in academia within the PhD route. Graduated, had my first entry-level position and then this is where I am right now.
Oh, crazy. And I think it's always interesting to talk to people, the amount of people I've talked to who they didn't, like when they went to their undergrad, their thought wasn't, okay, I'm going to end up in academia, but then here they are so many years later, still in academia.
And to be fair, I mean, again, and I was just doing an exec workshop last week, and I said, sometimes I feel like my life was quite serendipitous in the way that, for example, when I was doing my master's, it was an exec style master's. So the first job I ever got in HR, my colleague who actually ended up being my boss was the chief human resources officer. And then while working there, I had an opportunity to be a research assistant with my professor during my master's. So, there's these connections, I think, especially when you think about your career, which sometimes it happens quite serendipitously. But then I have to say, well, no, hang on a second. My success isn't just luck. It is also the fact that I hope anyways, I sourced them. I sourced them out, or I leveraged the opportunity and I tried to make the most of it to explore the possibility. When I was being an RA for one of my master's professors, who ended up being my PhD professor, didn't think about academia at all. Meddled, did the boring work, but invigilating, marking, that sort of thing. So throughout, I dabbled with it. I was playing around and trying to see, is this something that I truly do want to do? Because obviously the PhD is such a big commitment compared to a master's. So experimenting a little bit with that role and that identity of what does it look like before I jumped in,
Also, since you brought it up, because I've been thinking about this recently, of, the first thing that we normally say about ourselves, when you meet somebody, is your job title, right? Is what you're doing, the work that you're doing. So I don't know, have you thought about that any? And like, do you try to, I guess, when you meet somebody new to, say something else?
Yeah, really good question. You know what? I really think it depends on the context and who you're meeting. I think, and it's interesting when I introduce myself, I failed to say that I am a wife and a mom, right? And this is it because I'm doing this podcast? And I do think it's important in my narrative, as a female working in academia. But I think depending on the context, sometimes I do even tend to downplay my professional identity. If I'm meeting a group of my children's friends, parents, I focus on my role. It's almost the salience of the context, right? So I focus on my role as a mom and what I do with my kids versus, hi there, I'm a senior, I think who wants to hear that, So I do think, and I think this speaks more in terms of the fact that we do have a multiplicity with how we identify ourselves and who we say we are. And it does change. And I think it also changes with time. I remember when I first started my PhD journey, I would tell everybody I'm a PhD student, and automatically, people evoke images of what does a student mean? You must be leading this, you're back to school, and literally similar to undergrad, which in some ways, yes, but it also in other ways, no. So again, how did I craft my identity as someone that was already in the workforce, left that workforce? I was still part of the workforce. I was an academic workforce, but very different career trajectory, and almost separating myself from the traditional notions of what a student looks like. And and that's when I started to say, no, I'm a research assistant, or I'm doing my PhD, in that way. So it's kind of funny how we identify in different, or at least we say who we are in different ways.
Yeah, and in the different settings and groups. I think that's fascinating. Tell me why you are in education. So obviously you didn't start off you did your undergrad, but you went into the workforce. So why are you still here?
Yeah. So again, I think a lot of it has to do, as I mentioned before, it's specific to the discipline that I study. So my PhD was in human resource management. And prior to that, as I said, I was working in HR. So I actually felt while doing my master's, I was being introduced to theory, to knowledge, and it was, in my opinion, a case of rhetoric versus reality. What I was studying was literally not what was happening in practice in HR. And I think this was obviously a while ago, about maybe 15 years ago now, but at the time, HR hadn't yet caught up to what we were discussing in the class in terms of, being a strategic partner and what the things that it has to do, and even having a critical look at the HR, is HR a form of control in an organization? Different ways to think about it. But then, I would get all energized in the class, and then I would go and work. And it's primarily at the time, I shouldn't say this now, I'm sure the role has changed, but it was mainly a reactive admin processing. Management tells you, you act, ensure policies are met. So the big motivation for me to go into a PhD specifically in HR, I could have done a PhD in organizational sociology or psych. I wanted HR specific because I felt the profession does have a lot to offer. It's just not where it was. So being somebody who was behind the profession in the sense of creating the information, creating the knowledge, whether it was research, when it comes to education, actually feeling that if I was in front of a classroom, to give more of that realistic preview in terms of what does the HR profession look like, and how can you are the next generation of HR professionals, how can you actually change the landscape and change the way of thinking beyond what it has been? And I do see it. I see it entirely now. And I just like to be on that end. Like I like to see an impact. I'm always about impact. And I feel I can see that impact in my students. Interestingly, more in my students than in my research, because again, research, great for your CV, and I think it's great in terms of knowledge, but I'm sure it's how are we disseminating that from a journal article into the wider public? And teaching, I think, is a great way of doing that, because you have a captive audience. You can share that with your class.
Do you have any stories where it was just super evident of, wow, like I've been teaching this, and this is just I guess a practical example of that?
Yeah. Probably what was nice is not necessarily an immediate impact, but obviously now you've been teaching students and I haven't seen them for a few years, and then you all of a sudden will see them on LinkedIn, and they will say something to the effect of, thank you for introducing not even a theory, for example, but more in terms of thank you for opening my eyes to the fact that it's not always a straightforward line, or something in that way. And, and I see them now, and, they all are doing really well in their careers. So to know that I've had an impact in that way. So like in that perspective, I see it a few years, but in the classes, it's hard to see that immediate, aha, light bulb moment. I sometimes think it comes, but I think that's part of learning, right? Like learning is quite reflective. It doesn't always happen immediately.
Right. And I guess that's another reason to be grateful for LinkedIn is, to be able to see that in a few years is so cool.
Yeah. Exactly. Because I mean, otherwise, prior to things such as LinkedIn, when would you ever have an opportunity other than alumni events, maybe, or student reaches out to see what your students are up to? And these are students that I've had over 10 years ago, so it's quite nice to see what they're doing and how they're actually making use. I hate to use that word, but actually making use of their degree in a way. It's quite nice to see.
Yeah. All right. So in what you teach, what are some of, I guess, your favorite things?
I love always introducing students to a theory, but then telling them, let's look at the alternative way of looking at that theory. So even something really small, I teach organizational behavior, and this is literally an example from last night. And I taught the example of the importance that a person needs to have with respect to a term that we call self-efficacy. And self-efficacy is a term in our belief in our ability to complete a task. And the idea is that if we have high self-efficacy, now this is different from self-esteem. Self-esteem is a very consistent trait that we have, and it tends to be consistent across contexts, whereas self-efficacy is very specific on the task we're given. So the idea is that a person has high self-efficacy, you give them work to build that self-efficacy, you give them more work to build that self-efficacy. And a student rightfully said, because of course I'm also I'm very passionate about the idea of mental well-being and rest. I think we don't talk about rest enough in this hyper-capitalized world that we live in. And she actually stopped me for a second and was like, that's all great, Nadia, but you keep doing it and you will have burnout. And so just having that sort of quick disruption, sort of like a wrench throwing into the wheel of my teaching to actually say, yes, actually, you're very right. Let's have a conversation now in terms of what burnout looks like for individuals that tend to constantly perform well, because the ones that perform well tend to be given more work. It's almost like you are rewarded with more work. So I wouldn't necessarily say that I enjoy a certain topic, but what my point that I do enjoy are these while teaching. And this is a lecture, to have that interaction is while in the course of your teaching, a student comes out and throws something at you. And it actually is of relevance. And you say, okay, you know what? I can park these slides for a second. This is an important conversation and a way to rethink a concept or a theory that I may have introduced and almost problematize it. I love that. I always tell them, take what I say and find loopholes in it, because I think that's where the critical thinking. So I always say, I'm introducing to a theory, and I think especially because I'm currently teaching in the Middle East in Qatar, I even say, look, a lot of these theories have been developed through a very Eurocentric or Western lens. And also, I teach business ethics. Let's think about the relevance of these concepts. Yes, I'm here and I introduce it, but please know that you are in a safe space, that if you actually think, actually, this just does not apply, or there's nuances of it, let's have that. And granted, not every student, I think, is able to do that, but just having that conversation to say, it just does not sit with me, and why. So those are sort of my proud moments rather than a topic or a subject matter, for example.
I love that. I love it so much, especially as a student right now. Just having that safe space, I think, is so crucial. So do you think that literally saying the words, this is a safe space, gives students, I guess, the gut, the vulnerability to make that a safe space, or I guess to join you in that?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. So I think it's always good to set the tone. And yes, of course, saying it is very important and reiterating it through class. But more so than that is for the students to actually see it in action. So it's all great for me to say, this is a safe space. And then when they're saying ideas, I'm shutting them down. I mean, that goes, that's quite different. I can post it on my slides or whatnot. It means nothing. And actually, interestingly, last week I got feedback from a colleague that actually said, Nadia, a good piece of advice is that the student actually said that she always feels that she can talk, and no matter what she says, that I would never say that's not relevant. Is that I always give constructive feedback in the sense of that's a great point. And she goes, even if I know I'm wrong or I know it's not relevant, Nadia always encourages it. So I think a lot of it is how I enact what the safe space means. And students, I think, tend to be more freer when they see their colleague has lifted up their hand and said something that perhaps is not relevant, and the response is one of encouragement as opposed to shutting down, right? And then so I think by seeing and observing that, they are more likely to speak because they're observing peers. But I also, talk about the Eurocentric model. My education was done all in Canada. A very North American model, particularly in a business school model, is participation, and verbal oral participation is big. Their classrooms are seminar classrooms. And moving to the UK, when I first started my academic post, I had a lot more of international students that were not from the UK. And I was aware that participation need not be vocal, in the sense that, engagement does not mean constantly talking. They could be sitting quietly, mulling it all over, reflecting. So something else that I do in my classes is I sort of have like a post on the discussion board to say, you may not have wanted to ask it in class, but ask the question or send me an article or something that you might find useful. And that can be done, through the discussion board. I mean, in the past, I don't do it anymore. I don't use Twitter. It's not called X, but tag me on something. That's considered participation. There are all different ways to create that collegial, collaborative learning environment without the talking in the 2-hour lecture. So just to be open to those different alternatives too.
And I mean, that makes sense if you're thinking about how we're all different types of learners. So to just, I guess, be in a classroom that the only way then you can participate is talking. I never thought about that. That's interesting.
Yeah, because there are ways. And I mean, again, even in the workplace, in a faculty meeting, there are some that talk more. Doesn't mean to say the quiet ones are not interested. They just have a different way of expressing that. But also, I think going back to the safe space is something that I believe in it. And I believe in it in the workplace as well, is that the idea that we all have different values, different political beliefs, different religious beliefs, if that, and we will constantly disagree in terms of a certain thing. But I say with the number one, especially with my students, is number one, debate, but do it respectfully. And then again, linking back to learning is also, don't forget that back it up. Yeah, I'm not saying that I don't value your opinion. Your opinion counts, but we are in a classroom. Provide me with some research theory that can help frame that. So again, especially with ethics, there can be a bit of a debate with opinions on what we can do. And I say, you're fine. But your opinion can only take you so far if you can try to back it up with way and do it in a respectful way. And it seems to work. I haven't had too many things, so yeah.
Well, that's good to hear. Very good to hear. So, as a woman leader in education, tell me what challenges you've come across, and also how you've overcome them, not just the challenges.
So I think there are a few. Number one, I think in addition to being a woman, there's also the aspect of age. And I think because of the fact that I did my undergrad master's with, a stint, I was quite young, I guess. I hate to use that term, but quite young with respect to entering academia when I got my first academic lecturing position. So there's clearly a perception of bias, I think, in addition to being a female, also with respect to age and experience that comes with it in terms of, handling difficult students. And the challenges I had, I remember with the dean to say, are you, and again, strong enough to manage that? And I said, if my work speaks for it, then clearly I have a way of dealing with the students. My age should not matter. So in that case, I think he was coming more from the perspective of age than being a woman. But something even as small as applying for a position. I was pregnant at the time with my second child. And the person interviewing me, who is an academic, actually straight up said to me, we see that you're about to have a baby, congratulations, but do you think you can manage the work responsibilities and caring for a child. And again, by the way, I think this comes with experience. If I had been asked that question when I first started, I think, again, by the time I had my second child, I was a lot more confident. I was braver in my own abilities. And I actually said to him, I've come to this. Clearly, you think I'm suitable for this job because I'm actually meeting you. I've gone through certain steps. And I don't think that's an issue. And I said, with all due respect, I will manage my home front. You just worry in terms of whether I can perform on the job. And I did say to him, and I said, I know it's pretty obvious because my belly shows I'm about to have a child, but is that question, I said, just out of curiosity, do you ask that question to the male counterparts whose partners may be having a child? I mean, is that of as significance? And I think he felt really bad. I think it was a question that obviously was not in the structured interview, but he felt clearly some instinct. He wanted to ask that question in proper bias, which he did, and he felt very bad about it after. But while working, I actually think, and this is something I really believe in, I've been very fortunate to have had a female line managers throughout my academic career. And again, I'm not saying all female line managers are the same, but in my case, each of them, number one, I think advocated for me in the sense of, again, starting off my career as a female. I think they were my ally. My last line manager would even, at times, I do have the habit of saying yes to a lot and also reminding me to push back and even creating boundaries for me, saying, Nadia cannot take this on because she does literally do 2 shifts. She's working and she goes and looks after the children. So I think having a female boss, I guess, or manager really has helped my career. And I think I'm fortunate for that because I don't think other people who haven't had that have had probably more challenges.
That's interesting. And I'm glad that you've had that. I guess, and would you say that also, I guess, helped your confidence?
Question. I mean, I think so. What it has helped, if anything, is seeing these individuals as role models have actually made me do the same for my own, if that makes sense. As a leader, I want to now be an advocate, an ally, etc., because I had that. So I think purely through the process of role modeling, that has helped. I think in terms of not maybe confidence, but I think it's also a matter of not, I wouldn't call it protected, but knowing that, and again, this goes back to being an ally, knowing that somebody has your back, for lack of a better word. So if I was to push back or if I was to identify something, having a female ally know that they are on your corner and they will go to bat with you, I think in that way has given me more confidence to be braver in certain decisions that I don't believe in, because I know that if I'm doing it, people will, and not just back me up blindly, they will back me up because, I've proven that, but to know that, and I think makes a big difference in that way, in terms of confidence with tough decisions, difficult situations, or let's say with students, or my peers, to know that there are people on your side has really helped.
Absolutely. And I do think, especially in times when you're having to be vulnerable for whatever reason, that is invaluable.
Yeah. And I remember actually when I started my career, this wasn't in academia, it was when I was working in HR. I remember I was super excited. I had just graduated. I thought, it'd be great to have a mentorship program. So it was the type of firm had a partnership. It was like a law firm or professional services firm. And we had a lot of junior staff accountants. So I thought, wow, what a great way for me to pair up a junior staff accountant with a partner, a female partner, to help them. And particularly back then, it was a very male-dominated industry. I think out of a firm of about 18 partners, I think we had 4 or 5 female partners. So not much. And I remember going to a few from those 4, went to the 4 female partners, and 3 out of the 4 were like, oh my God, what a great initiative. We would love to support and sort of share our stories in terms of what we did, etc. And there was one female partner that came back and said, no. And I, again, going back to confidence, I was like taken aback, and I was like, okay, I actually was scared, like intimidated in a way. I wouldn't feel that way now, but at the time I was. And she goes, well, I had to do it myself. And I don't think I would be doing these staff accountants any justice if I held their hands through the process, right? So, as I said, I think it's a different mentality. And if I had that conversation today, as I said, I probably would have approached it differently. I kind of just said, okay, thank you. And I moved away, like I walked away. But again, I think we should be mindful that not everybody believes in the importance of allyship, I think. And I think that allyship is very different from what she described as hand-holding. Allyship does not need to be hand-holding. It's not about making things easier for anybody. It's about recognizing, for me, it's about recognizing challenges and, in that way, as opposed to eliminating challenges. It's by recognizing them. So I wonder if she's changed her mind. It's been, as I said, it's 15 years since then. I wonder if she has a different perspective, but I was really taken aback by that.
And that's so interesting. And yeah, and in a sense, would it be bad to, I guess, make it easier for the next generation, or to make it, I don't know.
So again, I don't actually necessarily see it as making it easier. Maybe that's what she thought, right? So for me, it's about, we are aware that there are more challenges that females face, many challenges, whether it's explicit biases, implicit biases, just gender, social roles, social expectations that we are required, I say required, we adhere to. So the scene itself is not a level playing field. So for me, it's not about making it easier. It's about trying to help, given this myriad of obstacles being faced, how can we help? And as I said, it's not about saying, okay, here's an obstacle, I'm just going to take it away. Not once, or in terms of proposing that person should get the job, you should still go through it, but let's be mindful that there needs to have perhaps extra support. Or in my case, as I said, still doing the job, but maybe I'm not, for example, doing the evening recruitment or whatever that is, to just be aware of that person's situation, I think. And that's what I mean in terms of speaking out. If the person is too, perhaps in a vulnerable position, or perhaps they don't have the confidence or the courage to speak up for themselves.
Yeah, I guess not changing the obstacle, but exactly what you just said, coming alongside the people and helping them.
And even being mindful of the obstacle. Like, again, I think the other day I was having a conversation, even with my husband, and, we have a very egalitarian relation, family dynamic. So it's not even that, but again, I think it's just making males, and even females sometimes, maybe some females aren't aware, but even being made aware of a certain challenge. I think that's key. I'm actually just marking at the moment, it's on topic for my OB class. Students are writing a paper on how to increase female representation at senior leadership. And they're giving me a whole slew of practical examples, which is really great. And what I found interesting is a lot of them said, we propose that females should go in a form of a leadership development program to help them with certain skill development and competencies. And I actually, I didn't mean it in a sarcastic way, but when I was giving them feedback on their work, I said, I actually find it really interesting that none of you have proposed that males should go on a training program to perhaps change mindset and perspective. It's the onus is, for me, the onus is still on females. And if anything, females now, research shows, are getting higher grades, higher professional designations, educational attainment. So we are already doing the work. So yes, put us on a training program, we'll get more skill, but that can only go so far, because if our male counterparts are still looking at us through a certain lens, or with biases, as I said, with this guy saying, oh, how will you do the job because you are a mom, that will never change. No matter how confident in whatever leadership training I have, that will always not change. So I said, maybe we need to refocus and say maybe a lot of this emphasis should be on changing perceptions to males as well. And also, we had International Women's Day, and I did talk about the importance of female allyship, but males should be allies too. This is not a female job. It's about both male and females coming together to be allies and again, it's, females face certain challenges, but whether it's any group that's known to face a certain challenge, it's not about us putting the work in, doing it together.
Right. Yeah. I love that too. It's about both the egalitarianism. Yeah, I agree with that. Wow. So in your research and in your classroom and in your teaching and you do, because you have a class that's women in leadership, right?
It's a workshop that we do for women that are working. So it's not actually a class. It's a workshop that we do for women who are in the workplace.
All right. So in all of that, what have you discovered to be some of the biggest, challenges that women are currently facing in education?
So I think we cannot escape the fact that we as a society have prescribed social roles for males and females. And again, whether that for some people is more enforced, whether they enact them more because of their own cultural context, where the cultural norms, the social norms are more, as I said, more forced onto them, or whether it's through the process of socialization where we are considered, what is considered to be a good daughter or a good wife or a good whatnot. And I think for me, the biggest challenge is how do we have a, for example, and I know this is quite a cliched example, but this idea, I teach leadership in my class, and I say it's interesting that a trait of leadership of a successful leader is assertiveness. And when a male enacts it, he is assertive. But when a female enacts it, she is considered aggressive. And it's literally the same behavior being enacted. It's just how we are labeled as such. And why is it that we are considered aggressive? Well, because according to societal expectations of what a female is, we are not meant to be the more assertive. We are meant to be the more passive, the more polite, the more courteous, agreeable. And again, I think this is a bigger conversation going back to ideology of, this male-female dynamic that, she's too bossy, like another very common line that's being said. And I'm actually very, very mindful of it now because I have a son and a daughter. And, if she's being assertive, why would people say she's being bossy or a bossy boots? You hear that a lot. You don't hear bossy boots too much for when you're talking to a boy.
No.
And I think the biggest challenge that I'm seeing, and whether it's from my undergrad students or even, when I'm engaging with professional women, very successful women in the workplace, it's how do you manage those workplace relationships and still, try to get ahead and advance without being called a bossy boots. And I think it's such a shame because no male has ever said that. And I actually did a session on Thursday, a different session. And one of the females said, throughout my entire life, I've always had in my mind to be the good girl, whether it's to be the good girl with my family and being the responsible one and never going against the grain of what that looks like, because of, certain norms that she's internalized in herself. So it's such a big project, but I think, again, why I do these workshops is to say, no, actually, you know what, we can sort of break away from these things, because only through that can we reproduce new expectations, right? It's not going to happen, as I said, by sending females on a leadership training course. It has to happen more endemically throughout society, and whether that's from school, in terms of what's being communicated to girls at school and all that. So, yeah. A lot to be said on.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's even more to be said than what you just went over. Thank you for that. Yeah. Wow. So coming off of that, what advice would you give to aspiring young women who are wanting to be leaders in education?
So number one, I would say think about, when we use the word leader, what does a leader look like for you? So is a leader, for example, is it somebody that actually has or takes on a formal title of, department head, dean, etc., within academia? And if you want that formal title, is it for what purpose? Obviously we know there's a legitimate authority and power that comes with a formal title, but at least to me, leader in education can be so much more. And I think that's where I've organically, not with, to say I want to be a leader, but where I think I've shone, whether it was with respect to even during my PhD studies, every time a new PhD student would come, in the form of mentoring that person, helping them understand the ropes, leading them through that, providing guidance with respect to me as an educator. When I see my female students leading, and with respect to mentorship in that capacity. And then, of course, if I was given a formal title in that way. So I think see it as two ways, one more formal in terms of leadership, and also putting yourself out there with respect to, career advancements. Don't feel that you can't do it. Like I remember when a position came up here in this institution, my ex-line manager said, I think you should, she goes, would you be interested in taking this position? And, here I am sitting talking all about courage and whatnot. And my first question to her back was, do you think I can do it? And she's like, of course you can, So I think that idea of doubting ourselves, and even if you have that little bit to think, do you think I can do it? Apply anyways. Clearly, if the position has come up and people think you can do it, you can do it. And having that confidence to go ahead for the position. You don't know until you try. But with all that being said, though, think about why are you doing it? And I think, again, at least where I am in my career, I have two very young children. So again, in addition to that first part question of me asking my ex-line manager, do you think I can do it? The second part was practically from a skill expertise perspective, I could, but then what does that take away from the home front? And I'm at the stage, at least now in my career, where I made a very conscious choice. So again, advice for people is knowing where you are at in your life, not even in your career, to know when are times when you're happy to slow that down and know that it could come back, still remain active, and also to know it's always literally a give and take. Like I remember even writing a blog ages ago to say I don't think work-life balance it doesn't exist. I think it's, I use the metaphor, I think it's more of a tug of war, where sometimes you're pulling more with the professional, sometimes you're pulling, but actually it's a tug because it's a struggle. It's actually two very distinct realms in opposition with each other. I don't think they complement each other at all. So again, I also think that the advice would be think about what you want and at what point. If you're just starting off and you can dedicate more time to these professional activities, do it. Knowing if you want to slow down, and even if you don't have a family, if you don't have children, that's fine. Maybe you just need to do it for your own mental well-being, or you have other aspirations. You want to travel, you want to do something else. That's okay too. Our career is not this marathon, the sprint that we have to do, and and it's okay to slow the pace down a little bit.
Hey, I'm really glad you said that. I feel like I needed to hear that. So thank you.
Yeah. No, and at the end of the day, I always think, what are we rushing for? Okay, and again, this goes back to in my opinion, back to these neo-normative assumptions of career scripts. This idea that you have to move up a org ladder and as fast as you can. Why can't we think of it more in terms of like hopping around to different things, and you're still having a career. It's just not a one direction up an organizational ladder, which I think actually does a disservice to people. And I'm actually more mindful of that when I'm coaching students when they're looking at careers, to say, look, you're looking at an entry-level job now, you're applying, you're about to graduate. You may have that job for 5 years, you may have it for about a few months, and maybe it's just opening doors to other opportunities. So thinking about that.
Absolutely. My dad uses this term called brachiation, which he wrote up a little thing defining it, and it made no sense. But what brachiation is the kind of like you're a monkey and you're going through the jungle and you're hopping from vine to vine, and you're just going along, like you have that momentum. And once you get to the new vine, there are numerous vines that weren't available to you before that you're on, and you can be going down one path and realize you don't want to be there, so you just turn and go another direction. And I think when he explained that to me, I was like, oh, well, that makes so much more sense than, it's more of, you're going on this journey of life and you're just hopping from vine to vine, versus, I guess, trying to go up this hierarchical structure or whatever, path in life you're in. And I think that's the other thing too, is we don't know the opportunities that are even out there until you take that next step.
Yeah. I love that. I love the idea of a monkey swinging from tree to tree.
Yeah.
And sometimes just staying put, right? Like just that's okay as well, And I think that's a really useful metaphor.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What if there's a little place in the jungle you want to go explore
That
that you like? You just want to sit down for a while. Do it, you know?
totally. And I think we need to
Absolutely.
that more because again, I mean, I get it as well. I think right now compared to, when currently your undergrad degree experience is very different from mine, is very different from the generations before. Because I think every generation is just getting more and more competitive in the sense, where people are getting better grades or more less job, and I think it's very easy to not get sucked into it. Of course you would, but also know that, what is that to what, like, what is all that doing at what expense to you, family, etc. So, to think about this holistically, it is your life. It's not just your career.
Absolutely. So what legacy do you want to leave behind?
Oh, it's a big
Deep question.
um, I would like to be, you mean as an educator, right? Or in general?
In general.
Okay. I am really big on this. I know I repeat it a lot, but to know that I was an ally to someone and I gave voice to people, whether that's an ally from a personal perspective or from a student and even a colleague perspective. I think that's something, it's not lip service. I truly, truly believe in. And I think it's something that we need, we all should be doing more of it. Authentic allyship is something that I hope people think of me as, that I do.
That's a good one.
Yeah, and that's the key thing, right? Because I do think the idea of authenticity is big because allyship can be politicized. We all know certain people that are your ally, but it's for their own political gain. And I think again, this has only come through time. And also maybe, as I said, just now reshifting my focus onto my family life and to know that I don't always need to be the one gaining. And if gaining, it's not a dog eat dog world. And if I'm supporting someone or advocating for someone, I don't need anything in return other than just knowing, what that person, I helped that person along the way in some way, shape, or form. That's something I hope I mean, it's kind of funny. It'd be useful to see if others think the same, but that's something that I try to do.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. All right. Last question. Who do you know that I should interview next?
Speaking of allyship, she was a PhD student of mine. Must be small. My goodness, she's not a PhD student. She was doing her PhD when I was doing my PhD. She started, I think, a year after me, and we just started co-authoring together. We became really, really good friends. And actually, speaking about allyship, there were a few personal and professional stumbles during our PhD life where I think we both truly engaged in what I called authentic allyship. Her name is Amanda. She's currently an associate professor at Grenoble in France. So, I will reach out, and I know that she'd be really keen if I told her. So she'd be someone I think will give you a lot of good stuff. I think so.
Well, Nadia, thank you so much. I'm so glad to have met you and to have had this conversation. And yeah, I just wish you the best.
Thank you, Anna. And again, please, I hope that in some capacity we can stay in touch. It'd be really good to do that and hear all about your career in academia. I'd love to hear all about it.
Well, hey, there's LinkedIn for a reason.
Yes, for sure. Exactly.
Thank you for tuning in to Nadia DeGama's episode of The Scholarly Sisterhood. Check out the episode description to learn more about Nadia and her work. This episode was researched and hosted by Anna Blankenship. And as always, we thank our editor, Lizzie Walker, and our writer and supporting editor, Emily Sanders. Hey, can you do me a favor? Can you share this episode of The Scholarly Sisterhood with a woman in academia you know? Subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode filled with stories, insights, and expertise from remarkable female scholars from around the world. Something that really stuck with me from Nadia's episode is when she said, if I'm supporting someone or advocating for someone, I don't need anything in return other than just knowing that I helped that person along the way in some way, shape, or form. Thank you, Nadia, for sharing your story with us.